Hello, everyone. This is John Dahl from the MindReset group, and I'm here with Taylor Spear, and we are going to be talking about mental health and different experiences, struggles, and kind of on a path to help each other out. And this is podcast number 4. So I just wanted to introduce myself, and Taylor is on the line as well. Hi, Taylor.
John.
So thank you for volunteering to do this podcast for the group, and we're just going to kind of get into the questions now. So the first question on this is, can you briefly describe either personally and or professionally some experiences with mental health that you've had and where you've come to be with those experiences at your life now? Um, Either on a chronological or an overview insight of what you prefer, and then maybe some direct connections that you've come into through mental health.
Sure. So like you said, my name is Taylor Spear. I was actually just got married just over 2 months ago, which is exciting and also a lot going on with that. Um,
Yes.
so my journey with mental health has really varied across kind of my lifespan. I am in my late 20s right now, so just some background as far as like age goes. Um, when I was young, I would say that I am somebody who definitely struggled with anxiety, but did not really know what that was and didn't really have a name for it. And unfortunately for me, it really was not until I experienced the loss of my brother to suicide in which I really started addressing my own mental health. Um, my family had tried family therapy when I was little, just as kind of a thing for us to all go to. Um, I prided myself on not wanting to talk to the therapist whatsoever. I had nothing to say. And really, for me, when I started going to grief counseling after the loss of my brother, I wasn't ready. I didn't want to have these conversations. I didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to have the hard conversations. And it really was not until, I would say 2015, 2016 or so, which is about 3 to 4 years after the loss of my brother. I lost him in 2012, that I really started to address my mental health in a way that was healthy, in a way where I was really able to kind of grow as a person. I was in grad school at that time and started dealing with severe anxiety and depression. I started feeling like I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing. I didn't understand what the point was. I didn't understand why everything was so hard. And just, I feel like at the same time, I was also dealing with the grief from the loss of my brother for the first time, um, and just having some really traumatic experiences around that. But thankfully, I was able to start seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist, and get help for my mental health. So since that time, I really have not talked to a ton of people about my depression and anxiety. And I'd say that's mostly because um, I still personally feel some level of stigma, which is something I'm always trying to fight against, but it's hard. And also it is something where I'm like, well, my problems just don't feel like they're that big of a deal. Um, it doesn't feel like it's compared to everybody else's problems that it really matters. So it doesn't feel like something that I have a right to talk about, which I know is not necessarily healthy, but just kind of my feelings on it. Um, so anyways, that's just some kind of background on me. And then now I actually work for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and talk to people every day about mental health, and have conversations about it, talk to other people who have lost their loved ones to suicide, who have struggled with suicidal thoughts. And that's definitely helped me to really open up and have more open and honest conversations with people. But it's something that I won't lie, it's always scary. It's not always, hey, my name is Taylor and I have anxiety. but it's something that I'm trying to be a little bit more open about and talk about.
Definitely. I think that thanks for answering the first question with all of that detail. I think that everyone's, if they're struggling with mental health or know someone who is, that everyone, we have to kind of remember that everyone's journey through that is a little gonna be different. And I think that that also brings in some barriers and roadblocks, because that you have to um and even in like your job or different friends that you talk to, you kind of have to sometimes pivot to listen to their stories and kind of gather their information that they're sharing with you and kind of pivot into their point of view on what they're telling. So I think that that's a huge barrier sometimes, and each
Absolutely.
person's story is different. And then I think that also coping strategies that you shared, such as going to therapy and stuff, is definitely very common, and but some people deal with it differently. So um, it's very catered to that person, what they're going through. You kind of have to take a step back, I think, and as can be hard as a friend looking in, or a family member, or someone who, if you yourself have mental health issues, your story and your situation is just going to be different based on how you grew up or what you've experienced in your life and up to this point. So I think that's definitely something that I've kind of realized with my own personal mental health, and others, that friends that I've talked to who have it, that it's, you kind of have to remind yourself and try to if you're gonna try to be their support network, that you're gonna have to pivot in some ways to kind of realize their story on their point of view. So that can be challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, something that helps is, and I'm really working towards this too, is we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And so really looking at it more as, you can have anxiety as part of your mental health, but you can also, your mental health can thrive. It can also struggle in different areas. There can be a mental illness there. But it's more than just, mental health, really looking at that as an all encompassing description for how we're feeling and how we're doing. Really
Definitely.
helps too to kind of help not perpetuate the stigma and help reduce that.
Exactly. Definitely. Great. Moving on to the next question we have here. And this one is a more catered to this day and age, with how we're all living with the COVID-19 virus that's around, and just kind of mental health, and everyone being working remotely, or a lot of people are either that situation. Maybe unfortunately some people have lost their jobs or been laid off, and then kind of just like dealing with being around people, roommates, family members, friends all the time, who you aren't around those people, partners, who you wouldn't be around those people this many hours during the day. So I think that there's definitely things that have come out with mental health with COVID-19. And I don't know if you have any insight, or you could touch on what you've encountered, either with your job or friends, or partners, family, that some struggles, or what you've seen with mental health in respect to COVID-19.
Yeah, great question. So, I think right now, right, like you said, it's a very unusual time, and a lot of us are trying to adjust. Well, all of us are trying to adjust with what the world looks like now. And for, like you said, for some of us that means we're not working. For some of us that means we're working from home. Or for many of the essential workers, they're risking their lives to go into work every day, working long hours, and things like that. So I think when looking at mental health and COVID-19, kind of the state of the world with the pandemic, it's figuring out how you as an individual, where that you kind of fall into. So if that's, you're home all day and you're not working because you've been laid off or furloughed, or your place of business is currently closed, whatever that is, figuring out what you can be doing with your time. So it's not just about focusing on, okay, so these are all the things in my life that are not going the way I'd like them to go, or these are all the things in my life that are not going right, so to speak. But taking the time to do some of that self work can be really positive and can have some really good outcomes. But it's also recognizing, I think that this is something that has really stuck to me, is right now the whole world is so stressed out, and it doesn't matter, if you're working or if you're not working right now. Everybody's really stressed out, and I think there's a lot of pressure to try to do more with the time that you have, and especially if you're somebody who is not necessarily working right now. But I think it's really important that we be gentle with ourselves, and just because hypothetically we have more time during the day, that doesn't mean that you have to use that to be productive. That doesn't mean that you have to be productive with your time. And I do really think it's important too with these essential workers who potentially keep hearing things about, oh, I've started making sourdough bread, or these are all the things I'm doing. And they hear that and they're like, why? I'm working really hard. So I think it's really important too that we just get to for how everybody's feeling, regardless of where that is, understanding that this is completely unusual, which means that your mental health may look different right now. And that may mean that you're struggling more. But we've also really seen people coming together in ways that they never have before. I know there's a lot of kind of free or things that have temporarily gone free in terms of mental health resources. And things that are available 24/7, 365 include resources like the Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Crisis Text Line. And I know that they've both reported out data that has said that they've been busier than usual. But for us, we also know that that's a good thing, because we know that regardless of how many people are contacting these lifeline resources, people are still struggling. And so the more people we can get connected to trained volunteers or mental health professionals can be really positive. And because so many of us are home right now, we've seen more of these online programs that are free that people are getting to access. So I think that there's a lot that we can kind of discover, but at the same time, I do urge everyone listening just to not put too much pressure on yourself. You don't have to change the world today or tomorrow. It's okay if it's just focusing on yourself, just trying to get out of bed every day. Those are also important things, and very important right now.
Definitely. Great. Thank you for answering that question. I think that definitely all of those things are very important to touch on. And just reiterating, I definitely agree on everything you've said in regards to kind of even taking your own personal mental health a little differently during this time, and mental health and anxiety and stress and depression is all going to look different kind of during this time, because we're not used to it, and it's just kind of something that kind of has been full blown on and put onto us. So I think that there is a sense of everyone is going through this right now, so there is that sense of, okay, not sheltered off from this, everyone's kind of going through it, so there is that. And then also I think that it's been really positive about all of the web and internet resources that have come out, with people being
Mm-hmm.
able to do remote games with each other, like online or Zoom calls,
Absolutely.
and then that sort of thing definitely is good to seek out during this time, and making sure that checking in with people on the phone or doing those video chats, I think, is important.
Yeah.
So definitely interesting during this time for mental health. And I think that staying positive and knowing that it won't be a forever thing is also very reassuring. Some people think that, you know, we've been going at it for X amount of months, but it feels like it's been years. So it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes taking a step back and being like, oh, it's only been, you know, a little over 2 months. But at the same time, knowing that, you know, things are going to be going back to somewhat of a normal, and even during after it, it's not going to be 100% how it used to be. So I think there's things to kind of look forward to in that sort of sense, and reminding yourself of those things when you do really feel like, okay, I'm very, you know, depressed being at home so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that those are very good tactics as well during this time. So the next question is kind of more geared towards your personal and professional experiences again with mental health, and what you've gathered or seen on those two fronts. And this question is more on how do you view like struggles and or a path to gather and resolve depression and suicidal thoughts, not even just those two things, mental health too, just because this whole podcast encompasses mental health, but those two things particularly that I know some people definitely struggle with, and I wanted to get out there on this podcast. And maybe how does daily life and other factors contribute to well-being of a person, and how we perceive our journeys of mental health and those outside factors. So I don't know if you could touch on some of those aspects.
Yeah. So, one thing I want to start with is just by saying that human beings are incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
We just by our nature, we are resilient people. And so I think that, and the reason that I think that we are going to be able to get through this pandemic together is because of that resilience we continue to build. When somebody is suffering with mental illness, that resiliency that we all have innate within us can weaken and can dissolve. And somebody who you may think of as, you know, that person is always really positive, they always see the brighter side of life. If that person is struggling right now, that's likely because of that resiliency that's just continued to kind of erode. And that could be for a lot of reasons. But I think that right now, especially if you've noticed that, you know, you're somebody who typically is usually cheerful and happy, outgoing, things like that, and you're starting to lose that part of yourself, that may be just something to look for in terms of, well, is this something that's temporary? Is this getting worse? And is this maybe something that I need to start addressing? So when it comes to really any individual and looking at depression and suicidal thoughts, from the outside, it can be really hard to tell if somebody's struggling. And like I said, I lost my brother to suicide in 2012. And for me especially, and for many loss survivors, we believe that the idea of suicide and the idea of the act of suicide, that is preventable. And that's a hard thing to come to, having lost my brother to suicide. But I also truly believe that. Something that we talk a lot about in the place I work, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, is that we believe suicide is preventable, but we also know that we can't save everyone. But there's a lot of things that we can kind of do in terms of how we can help others. And a lot of that comes with reaching out and having conversations with people. And when we talk about, excuse me, when we talk about resolving depression or suicidal thoughts, it's first kind of figuring out if that's what's going on. So if you as an individual are struggling, or you notice someone is struggling, first it's just addressing that, you know, recognizing, okay, I'm struggling right now. And what does that mean? You know, you could look at things like you know, based on the psychiatric definition, what is this mental illness? What does this mean for me? But also just personally, are there things that we can be working on to help improve that? And if there are not things that we can be doing, or if the things we're doing aren't working, can we get professional help at that point? And I think that that's really important, is that we find time to seek professional help if that's something that we need. And many people would argue that everybody should have a therapist. Everybody should have somebody else to talk to, somebody who that's their profession and can continue to help you throughout your lifetime. But I'm not saying you have to go to therapy or anything, but I do think it's a really great resource. For everyone, regardless of if you're struggling or not struggling. But it is definitely something where if you are struggling, seeking professional mental health treatment and diagnosis can be a really positive step in the kind of direction of getting help and getting better. Some people who live with depression and suicidal ideation will live with that forever. And that is incredibly unfortunate. It's something that we as an organization are trying to fight to kind of work out every day. That's part of the research that we fund and things like that. But for many people who are currently dealing with depression or suicidal ideation, there is help available. There is something called that treatment resistant depression and medication resistant depression. But for most people, there are effective treatments out there. It is really just about taking that next step to kind of get that help. And that's not to say that if you get help now, you're going to need help 10 years from now. If you start medication now, you're going to need medication 10 years down the road. If you start medication now, that medication is definitely going to work. But these are all things that really do require a professional to try to figure out and to try to navigate next steps on. And so, yeah, that's kind of my first thoughts on that. But John, feel free to ask any follow-up questions if you feel like I missed something there.
Yeah, that definitely is some good info on that question. I think that, again, going back to the sort of the beginning of the podcast when we were talking about not everyone's mental health journey is the same, and that some of that path to kind of figuring out your depression or trying to get on a better path of not necessarily resolving it, but just living with it in a way that's positive and that you feel like you can kind of live your life with. And I think that sometimes people don't go down the medical route of, okay, I'm going to take medicine for it. Some people just do, therapy. Some people just, if they are more mild in their case, they could just even doing different hobbies or stuff can lift their mood. So I think that is something to also take into consideration, that maybe some people who do struggle are immediately like, well, I don't want to get on medicine for it, or I don't want to do this to this part of like trying to do something different in my hobbies, or maybe they're a little scared of that. But I think what makes their journey more positive and what might help them is just kind of knowing that they have to kind of branch out at some point and kind of just try things that are out there to see see how their mental health is going to change. Because if you don't take that first step into those areas, then you kind of aren't going to get better, or you don't know what's going to help them.
Yeah, and I think you just reminded me too, one of my favorite analogies of this is like, if you think of somebody with glasses, before somebody gets glasses, their vision, they may not even realize that their vision is blurry. Maybe they start getting headaches, or they're squinting all the time. They feel like they need sunglasses every time they step outside, even if it's cloudy outside. All these little things that our brain is saying, I can't see, I can't see, I can't see, but here's how I'm trying to compensate. And all of a sudden you get glasses and your life has changed. You right now as an individual may be struggling, and you just think that's normal, right? Like your glasses, before your glasses, you're like, oh, it's a little blurry, but it's probably fine. Or, I don't know, my headaches are probably not related to this vision thing. So if you think about it in the same way where, your mental health, maybe right now it's okay, but it could be better. And so having a little bit of that aid where it's, if it's, it's those glasses, or if it's therapy in this case, whatever that little bit of an aid is, trying it out isn't going to be hurtful whatsoever. But you don't realize how much better your life could be if you're able to get additional support and help for something so important such as mental health.
Exactly. I love that analogy. That's a good one.
Thank you.
Definitely. That kind of brings us to our last question of the podcast. And this is more of a follow-up question, and something to kind of take away for the listeners, is to how can you as an individual, either if you have depression or don't, help those in your inner circle, your family, your friends, people who struggle with mental health? How does one initiate that barrier kind of with that person to, and I know that can be very scary, because you don't want to maybe offend them or kind of take that step for that reason. And then any additional insight into those people as a whole to help mitigate depression, prevent harming yourself, or those warning signs of getting to that point, for someone in your inner circle. So just wanted to kind of wrap it up on this question and see what kind of insight you have to that.
Yeah. So one of the things we've learned through research that's really a common, I feel like at least in my experience has been a common misconception, is asking somebody directly about suicide. So asking somebody the question, are you thinking about suicide? That's not going to put the idea in somebody's head. It's not going to be hurtful or harmful to the person, but it can really be that first step in them opening up to you.
Yeah.
When approached so directly with that question, people may feel like they have that space to, okay, I have this opportunity to now open up. But they may not, but it can also it lets them know that you're somebody that they can come to in the future. So it can be really scary if you're worried about someone and you think that suicide may be something they're considering, but truly asking directly about it, that's going to bring you peace of mind. And that's also going to bring that other individual peace of mind, and really help them during that time where they're struggling. And one way to start these conversations, one way to have these conversations with their loved ones is just to talk about what you notice. So for instance, if you have set up, like, let's say right now you've set up weekly Skype sessions with your friends, and all of a sudden John Doe has stopped attending those Skype sessions or whatever, you can always say, hey, I realize that you've stopped coming to our weekly Skype sessions. I just want to see if everything's okay. How's work going, or how are other things going? Start that conversation. Ask them how they're doing, and let them know what you've noticed. When it comes to any mental illness, we have the ability to pick up on different warning signs, especially when it comes to suicide. Now, people may not always display these warning signs, but really, when you notice a change in your loved one or your friend or coworker that is unusual for the person that you seem to know, it's an opportunity to start that conversation. Something that I really, really, really encourage everyone is, if you're worried about someone, reach out. If you're worried about somebody on Facebook, they post something alarming, or even if they post something where they're kind of joking about suicide or joking about harming themselves, send them a message. If you have their phone number, send them a text message, give them a call. It's really, really important to start that conversation. And even if long-term you're not going to be the person who supports them and helps them and is there for them 100% of the time, you can at least take that first step to connect them to resources. In terms of what resources are available, like I said, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline and Crisis Text Line are available 24/7, 365. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline phone number is 800-273-TALK, or it's 800-273-8255. And the Crisis Text Line is 741-741. And for both of those, you don't have to be the one struggling to actually reach out to either of those resources. They do kind of prioritize those who reach out in terms of severity first. With the Crisis Text Line, they have a program, the text, I guess, scans for trigger words or things like that. I don't know exactly how it works, but that's been my understanding. And they put those towards their top of their queue if they have the queue. But that being said, if you're worried about your loved one and you're with them, especially, you can call together. You can be the one who calls. If you're not sure what to do, but you're thinking to yourself, I am worried about this person, or even if you're worried about yourself, especially, using those resources that are available. They're free. They have really, really good support and can be extremely, extremely helpful and beneficial. And I think something a lot of people don't realize is a Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It typically redirects the phone call to their local crisis intervention if the state has one. And with that comes the ability to potentially send out direct crisis intervention support. They can send an ambulance if needed, but they can have all of those resources available. And I know in Georgia, for instance, where I'm based, we have what's called the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. There are local affiliates. So if I were to dial the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, it would get routed to them. They can also help us find things like drug treatment beds, or different places for rehab and things like that. So I really encourage people to use the resources that are available. And if you're not sure what those are, doing a quick Google search, following different resources like the MindReset or the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We're always sharing things that others can use. And so I think that's really important too.
Yeah.
But I do really urge everyone, it's not necessarily going to be a comfortable conversation, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. As somebody, for maybe the last time, I don't know, I'll say that I lost my brother. And for many loss survivors, we live with constant regret, constant what ifs. And that's something that's really difficult to navigate. But my words of wisdom would always be, don't be the what if. Don't sit there on the other side thinking to yourself, what if? You're not wholly responsible for any other individual. So there's maybe nothing that you can personally do that's going to convince this person to get the help that they need. But reach out to other people. You have other people who want to help this person or help yourself. And get more allies in the fight for this too. Having these conversations in private is a great place to start. But if somebody you're really worried about is not receptive to you, bring in another person. Figure out who else they might be more receptive to hearing from. And having that conversation then can be really important.
Exactly. I think that is a wonderful wrap up in answering that question. I think that all of those things, all those resources, and having those conversations that you've touched on are very important. I know that I'm glad you touched on the aspect of don't be on the end of the what ifs. Don't, a lot of people, myself included, growing up, very nervous talking to other people about their mental health, and talking about my own with my parents or with friends, just because it's awkward and you feel like they don't understand you, they don't understand your life. But I think that while that is maybe true, because going back to the beginning of everyone's story is different in the sense that they might not understand what you're going through, but I think just being the support for them is what the first steps are. And I think making that effort, if the individual who you're very close with can't do it for themselves because of those barriers, that you as the support network for them, that you, even if they are going to, get mad at you, or they don't think that they want that support, that sometimes navigating that can be hard because you don't want to lose your friendship. But if you really value the friendship, then that is something that I think over trumps those barriers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those are very good tactics to remember. And then also everything you've shared thus far up to now. So I definitely wanted to wrap this up now, and just so we're not, talking everyone's ears off. So they're like, okay, when is this ending? So I think that is a great, some great info you've shared. I really wanted to thank you for being part of this podcast session, and everything that you have shared is very wonderful. And I think that having these conversations, and for those who do struggle with mental health, is very important. And I hope that people can find some solace listening to this, or checking out the resources. So I just wanted to mention at the end of this now that you can visit the mindreset.com, utilize the phone and the text methods that Taylor mentioned during this podcast. Use the internet, Google searches, talk with family, friends, if that makes you more comfortable. Having those perspectives of maybe someone who went through these things, rather than doing it all on your own, because it can be very stressful to do it all on your own, and no one really should have to. So I think that definitely wanted to make sure we touched on those resources, and I think we have. So just wanted to thank Taylor again. Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks so much, Sean.
And as we have noted in the past, we do try to get every podcast out at the first of the month. So this is going to be our June podcast, and then we'll have another one in July. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening.